when we want to. I mean, you know, that's what play is all about, make your own rules.
Welcome to Slate School and our panel discussion entitled Play in School and Society. Slate School is committed to excellence in education, and we are delighted to present the Education Idea Lab, which is a new, unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. This thought-leading event convenes leaders, change makers, and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. Thank you for joining us. We're thrilled to have all of you with us here today. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I am head of school at Slate School. I'll briefly introduce you to Slate School, review the webinar logistics, and we'll then hear from our 5 amazing panelists. So Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit elementary school where education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. At Slate School, we have formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice, to create meaningful educational experiences for learners of all ages, and to change the landscape in education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education, and these online dialogues, like today's, are free and open to the public. We are so delighted to have all of you with us today. I believe we have learners joining us from 6 continents. So now I'll describe the basic logistics of this webinar. We have 5 amazing panelists, and they have a wealth of expertise to share with you during the next hour. And each of our panelists today will give about a 2-minute introduction about themselves and their current role and some of their key guidance and advice about play in school and society. We'll then proceed with the panel discussion. We invite you to submit additional questions as comments on Facebook, and we will select some of those questions to ask the panelists today too. So we'll proceed with having our panelists introduce themselves in alphabetical order. I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panelist, Jane Aronson.
Hi everybody. Happy to be with everybody here. I'm in Maplewood, New Jersey, and 2 minutes. I'm looking at my timing. Okay, on go. I am actually a clinical assistant professor of pediatrics at Cornell Weill Medicine, and I'm an HIV/AIDS expert from the domestic pandemic that occurred in the 80s and in 3 countries abroad. And I am also in a quirky way, still doing adoption medicine. However crazy that sounds, considering the global pandemic, there are a lot of people who are still interested in creating families through adoption domestically as well as internationally. But mostly, more important than anything else, I've become the student who I have always wanted to be and have been all my life. What does that mean? Is that the opportunity that we have all been offered now to learn about something we know nothing about. Once again, just like AIDS, we knew nothing. And we knew nothing for a long time, and we still were extremely smart to figure things out and to help people and to save lives. And here we are again, and I'm having an opportunity to be a student, to learn everything I can suck up and absorb, and to then share with people, you know, the conundrums and the puzzles around it. And frankly, this fits my time of life. At 68 years of age, I just couldn't be more interested in learning, and especially about children who I adore and love to bits, and who I think that we have a fierce and warrior-like approach at this point in time to making sure that the kids can benefit from this pandemic, and that we can help them be the best humans that they can be on this planet.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Jane. And now I'd like to introduce you to Jesse Robert Coffino. Jesse.
Julie, thank you so much. Dr. Aronson, Roberta, Jana, Dr. Gray, Dr. Golinkoff. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here with you all today. For the last 5 years, I've worked very closely with an educator in Anji County, China, who has created an approach, a philosophy, a set of physical materials and very sophisticated teacher practices that focus foremost on guaranteeing the child's right to play. But that first begins with the child's right to love, and which really is safety. And what we get from starting with safety, starting with trust in the child, space and time for the child to express themselves and to be heard, to have their stories listened to first before we tell stories about their experience, that when you create that safety, when you create those clear, consistent environments that are open-ended and minimally structured, when you're responding and listening to the needs of children, that the natural trajectory of children is to understand the world and themselves and people around them, to make connections. I think a lot of cognitive science is telling us that children are engaged in a process of cause and effect mapping, seeing the relationships between their efficacy and the world around them, whether it's the physical world or the social world. And so that natural trajectory of children's experience in a safe environment, I guess we could call it play. We advocate for a simple definition of play as deep and uninterrupted engagement in the activity of one's own choice. And so when that happens, you see risk, which could be physical risk, but it's really fundamentally the risk of making a prediction based on information. The more safety we have, the more we can confront uncertainty, because uncertainty is models and predictions and science. It's, do we have antibodies? Do they do something for us in this situation? Do these tests work? When will school open? There's a lot of uncertainty in children's lives, in our adult lives now. And so we have to be clear about the things that are certain, about the role of safety, the role of listening. And that just leads to these beautiful expressions of discovery in children. As adults, we can discover children engaged in that discovery. And that text, which is the child, which is their experience, should form the basis of our knowledge of any given child and the decisions we make as adults in creating the conditions for children's learning and in creating the space for children to be heard. And that's the message we take from Anji. That's also the work we do with our pilot programs in the United States, in Head Start and Early Head Start programs, the works that we're doing in Africa and in Europe. It comes back to a clear definition of safety, protecting that right, and letting people discover and see children, because administrators see that, policymakers see that, adults see that, and they see how their needs for children are being addressed through the child's natural trajectories. And each child is different, and each child has needs and circumstances that vary, but each child needs to be listened to, each child needs to be seen, each child needs to be believed in, that they have the capacity to meet their own needs when they can, and express their ability to solve problems that they confront in those social and physical worlds.
Jesse, I love your passion. Thank you. Yeah. And now Roberta, and I'm going to say this, Michnick, Golinkoff.
Excellent.
Roberta, I did it?
Excellent.
Awesome.
So I'm here in Wilmington, Delaware. I'm a professor at the University of Delaware. I am honored to be included with this wonderful group, especially Peter Gray, who has been writing on these issues for a long time and has been a leader in our field. So first of all, play is universal. Animals play, octopus play. Have you guys seen the video of the crow that brings a piece of cardboard up to the top of a sloped roof, places it at the top, jumps on it, and then sleds down?
Yeah.
Birds. We knew the corvid family was smart, but playing, making a sled, I mean, that's fantastic, right? So not only is play universal and across species, it's at the root of our democracy is how I feel. I feel like play is more important than ever in the face of some totalitarian tendencies in our current administration. I would love to see parents and children playing more together at home now that they are at home, given that parents are children's first teachers, and I don't mean that parents have to teach children in an explicit way. When parents play with their children in the most natural and organic way and let the children take the lead, children are exposed to things that make a difference in children's lives. For example, playing blocks together. If the parent follows the kid's lead and uses terms like on top of, over, under, through, that is spatial language that just comes naturally out of grown-ups and that we know makes a difference for children's learning of spatial and mathematical concepts. So it's really important to encourage this kind of play between parents and children. Now, I know that there is a lot of stress out there now, and that I feel like we are among the privileged. There are many families who don't know where their next meal is coming from and who are worried about whether they can continue to live in the space they're in because they may not be able to make the rent. I would urge even those parents who are perhaps not so much listening to this broadcast, that play is good for them too. That 10 minutes of play, sitting on the floor with your child, if you focus on what the child is doing and just start out by describing what the child is doing, your own stress level will decline. Same thing with reading to children. It will reduce your own stress level. So I'm all for play. I'm also a researcher who tries to discover what the parameters and limits are for different kinds of play. And I'm sure that we will get into that when we have our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Roberta. I think there's already a theme emerging. And now to introduce everyone to Peter Gray. Peter, welcome. Thank you for coming.
I'm really happy to be here. So I'm a research professor at Boston College. I retired from teaching a long time ago, but I continue to conduct research and do a lot of writing. I have for many years been focused on play, how children learn through play, how they learn through play and their self-directed exploration. You know, the idea that children learn by being taught is a pretty new idea from an evolutionary point of view. Throughout human history, children taught themselves, and they did so through play and exploration. And unfortunately, in recent times, we're suppressing that. We're suppressing it in our schools, we're suppressing it out of schools. One of the things that I've documented, not so much from my own research, but by bringing other people's research together, is that over the last 6 decades, there has been a continuous and overall huge decline in children's opportunities to play. And to play, as Jesse said, a key part of the definition of play is it's self-chosen, self-directed. It's what children choose to do. We have altered childhood. We have, I would argue, suppressed childhood. We have almost destroyed childhood in our modern time. Children are meant to play with other children, away from adults. This is how children learn to be adults. This is how children learn to solve their own problems. It's how they learn to negotiate with their peers without some authority figure doing it for them. This is how children learn to take initiative and so on. This is also how children acquire the emotional skills to deal with the bumps in the road of life because they experience them and so on and so forth. The other thing that has been documented, and I have brought the documentation together in my writings, is that over this same period that there's been this huge decline in children's freedom just to go out and play. There has been an equally huge increase in all sorts of mental disorders of childhood. And it's not just that we're identifying disorders that we didn't identify before. These are by standard questionnaires, like the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory that has a scale for depression. Based on that, the rate of depression among school-age children, this would be mostly teenagers because they're the ones who have been tested by this measure. The rate of depression by the year 2000 was somewhere between 5 and 8 times what it was in the 1950s. And this has been a gradual increase, and depression has increased since then. The rate of childhood suicide is now 6 times what it was in the 1950s. And in my writing, I've argued for a cause-effect relationship, as if one would have to argue for a cause-effect relationship. You take away play from children and they're going to be depressed, right? So that's some of my writing. I've also studied how children who are free to play and explore and freed from the kinds of compulsions of what we call schooling, educate themselves through their play and self-directed education when they have the opportunities to do so. So that's just a little bit of background on some of my research and writing.
Wonderful. Thank you. So excited to hear more. And now, friends, just to introduce you to Jana Zindell. Welcome, Jana. So glad you could come.
Yeah, thank you. I always go last. My last name.
I should think about that actually and go in reverse order sometimes. That's what I do in the classroom, right? Start in the middle.
Right. Well, I feel very honored to be on this call with all of you. All of you have inspired my own journey in different ways. And I've met with all of you, I've read your work. And so thank you, Julie, for inviting me to be here. As you said, I'm Jana Zindell. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Ubuntu Pathways. I've been with Ubuntu for almost 20 years. We just turned 20 last year. And I spent the majority of those years in South Africa, where our organization is, in the townships of Port Elizabeth. And what we do is we have cradle to career support for children and their families in this vulnerable community that we work in. And over the past 20 years, we've built a community health clinic that provides women and children with pre and postnatal care. We provide HIV treatment to over 400 individuals in our community. We have primary healthcare services. We have counseling, support, and outreach programs. About 10 years ago, we launched our early childhood program. And when I joined Ubuntu almost 20 years ago, which dates me, my dream when I first was down in South Africa was that Ubuntu would open up a school to break the mold of the traditional education that I was seeing in all of the schools that I visited. And it took us 20 years. And we finally opened our Ubuntu school, which helps us complete the pathway for our children and our community out of poverty. So I'm very excited about that. And, as far as everybody's kind of said it all already, and there's so much that we can elaborate on all of this, but I want to follow up on Roberta's point and Dr. Gray's point regarding just this, what's happening right now, and the freedom to play that is an opportunity right now, this freedom from school, right? Nobody's in school, so we're home. And I've got 2 little boys that are not here right now, which is pretty crazy, but they're running around and they're playing and they're free. And I see it, I see all the challenges that exist, and I feel very privileged to be in the environment that I'm in right now. But for children everywhere, I see this opportunity for us to take back, to re-embrace play. And what I've seen is that it's, children play wherever they are. Children play unless they're stopped from playing. It's the adults that we really have to worry about. It's the adults that tend to overregulate play. And right now we can see it more than ever. We're working, we're under stress, we're trying to work from home. We need order. And when we see play happening, there's this fear that play could disrupt the peace of the learning environment, the home or the school. So we create these rules and we set these parameters. And right now, there's so much focus on what we need to do for our children in this remote learning environment, and how do we bring in the academics, and what are the metrics, and what goals should our children be achieving by the end of April and May. And I think what we need to do more than anything is make sure that parents understand that it's okay for their children to play, and create the home environment to be a place to explore and investigate and fuel their curiosity. And for myself, Roberta, you mentioned, play, we need to play as adults, and even reading with our children and playing with them de-stresses us. And in this environment that we're in right now, the only thing that is keeping me grounded is when I'm playing with my kids and I'm reading with them. And where I work in the townships, you had mentioned the spaces that different people are in, the spaces, people are living in shacks and one room homes with 10 or more people living in them. And yes, they're thinking about food and not about all the protocols for social distancing and everything that we're talking about. But what we're encouraging and what we're seeing in the homes that we work in is that parents are playing with their children, and that's what's helping to de-stress them too. So I'm excited about the opportunity in this new environment that we're all facing right now.
Yeah, Jana, I think I had a colleague, and her name is Ann Kyler, and she used to always say, no matter what situation you're in, you could be at home, you can be at work. I was a new parent, and in my job there as a teacher, and she just said, listen, if things start going sideways, just step back and watch the child, because the children will tell you. And I think for so long, over time, we've started to think that we know better, and it's really just not. It's just not true. There are so many greater lessons I've learned actually from children, and maybe actually I should convene a meeting like this where kids tell us exactly what we're doing wrung in the world, because I think they probably have the right idea about that, and I just haven't listened well enough to pick it up. I just wanted to say to Jane, because I think I've had a conversation with you about this before, about how you kind of define play across ages, and just kind of if you could talk a little bit about what some of the misconceptions are in our world about play.
I think I have to sneak in and say it's really interesting how I introduced myself today. Some of the people who know me well would say it's kind of interesting Freudian operations here, because I'm, I ran a foundation for 23 years, which I founded in 1997. And I didn't include it in our opening discussion, but I just wanted to sort of bring that up, because obviously that has bearing on something that I'm going to say about play, okay? And that is that sometimes we just don't know what play is. We know what it is because we're academics and we've spent so much of our careers writing, researching, and experiencing play. So let me just say to you, I want to plant the seed here that, like much of what's going on in our society today, we don't necessarily define lots of what goes on for children. What's education for children? What does learning mean? What does play mean? We forget the definition, and what's lovely today between the hours of 11 and 12, we're going to be able to do that, and how lucky are we? But let me say to you that I feel very strongly about this, is that I had an incredible life of play. And I want to really mark that as how to answer your question about defining play. I'm still playing and had this incredibly lovely upbringing where I lived on the top of my father's store and played in a neighborhood which bordered on Jamaica and St. Albans, which was all Black. My father was a grocery store owner, and I played with the children in the neighborhood. And just humorously, I'll bring up the fact that I did not know that they were Black. I would see their hands, and we would play ball together, and I would see that the palms of their hands were white. And I would think to myself, how come someone says that person's a Negro? And I was a little girl. I was born in Brooklyn, raised there for the first 4 years of my life. And I was very engaged in a kind of culture, if you will, of play on the street. And then when we moved to Long Island, I was constantly at play. School was play in many ways for me, but I was very engaged in being gardening and playing war with my little soldiers in my giant bag of thousands of pieces of shoulders. And all of that play, sport and play and dance and music, it was a major part of my life, as were cartoons, which actually were powerful ways to stimulate my understanding of play. Loved Chuck Jones, devoted to the concept of what was seen in the cartoon, even though obviously cartoons are quite antiquated in many ways from that day. But my life was about play, and I never stopped feeling the importance of the connections that were made in the neighborhood all of the stuff we did together, the making of rules that were arbitrary, the freedom to be bad, the freedom to be good, the freedom to learn, the freedom to create projects. We were building all the time, we were drawing. And so that's never left my life and has always been the saving grace for how I see play in children's lives and how important I felt it was as a pediatrician in emphasizing to parents this final piece of my little presentation. And that is, I felt very early on that adults were dangerous. And not only because my parents and my family was fairly neurotic, but basically because they would make rules about when we had to get in at the end of the day, and how more important it was that we get in before it was dark, which was ridiculous. It was best to play when it got dark. Actually, you had an advantage. But the fun piece here is they were stuck. Our families were stuck about content in education, that if we played too much, if we had too much recreation, too much time on the tarmac, we weren't going to be good students, and we weren't going to be able to achieve in school and go to college. And so play and learning were at odds when we were growing up.
Yeah. Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jane, we have reached the point now that the American Academy of Pediatrics, in their journal, Pediatrics, put out an article I was one of the co-authors on that offered pediatricians the idea of giving families a prescription for play.
Yeah.
How low have we gone when we have to inform pediatricians that they need to tell their families that it's okay to play by issuing a prescription? There's just not enough free play going on. And a lot of it has to do with fear. Now, if you live in a neighborhood that has a lot of crime, okay, it's a different issue. I understand why you can't let your children go out, but they could play in the house. And for those children who can get out, that's how children learn to be autonomous and independent. Little by little, they wander further and further away from where they live. And I can remember too, this is going to be about Brooklyn, the thrill of being able to walk to the library by myself to get books. You know, that feeling of independence and becoming more adult-like is what we deny our children when we don't let them spend time alone with peers in play.
And you know, there's Maurice Sendak has a book, The Sign on Rosie's Door. Yeah. And there's a scene when Rosie turns to her mom says to Rosie, go do something. And she goes and she writes a note on the door. She comes back and the mom says, what did you do? And she says, well, I wrote a sign on the door. Her mom says, go do something else. And the implication is she should just go and do what she needs to do. I mean, that was Brooklyn. That was this idea that, you know, there is a division between the child space, as Peter is saying, that space of freedom separate from the adult's needs that they have. I think though, you know, Jane, you said your life was about play, but, you know, I think that if we think of play as deeply engaged, self-directed activity, one of the reasons Julia's saying I'm so passionate is this is play for me. You know, I'm joyously, deeply engaged in this conversation and hearing you all. So I hope that play for adults is not simply playing with children, but also having children see adults play. That's really important. Because if you want to model for children, model deep and uninterrupted, joyous engagements. Like if you have the conditions to do that, because we do have so much on us right now. But I think that with Peter's question, you know, teaching has not long been a part of the child's experience. What worries me now is if we look at guided play, learning through play, that teaching is now becoming part of play, where, as Peter says, like the needs of the adults and the children have to be somewhat separate. For a child to have that experience, what we're looking at is how can an adult be present and see that and witness that and record that and then listen to children talk about that.
They might not need to know that they're learning.
Julie, I'm making notes, but could you make a note that we should discuss gender and play, okay? Hold that.
All right, I'll make a note. We'll get there. Peter, I want to ask you now. It seems so clear. We're all sitting here, the six of us nodding our heads like crazy, and I know that we're not alone in the world. How have we gone so far astray? And what are we doing wrong that we're not getting this message to people in a way that they can hear it and be relieved that they don't have to do so much, massaging of what kids are doing?
Well, I guess I'm going to interpret that question as, what are we doing wrong as a society that has led us to think that kindergarten children should be being drilled in reading and numbers instead of playing?
Yes.
What?
Yes.
Why have I have the neighboring town of Brookline? To me, the kindergarten teachers have almost all threatened to resign because they are being forced to do what they regard as cruel to children, which is to not have play in kindergarten and to be teaching academic stuff. We have gone insane as a society, absolutely insane, in the sense of focusing on this so-called academics. What does academics even mean to a kindergarten child? My goodness, I mean, children, what every developmental psychologist knows, everybody who understands children know that children learn by playing and exploring. They have to figure out the world. They don't learn by being drilled and tested and taught in this kind of way. And it's just, the problem is, the real problem, it comes from a number of things. It is true that the fears we have of society, the fears that have developed in society are a big part of it. We're irrationally afraid. We think that there are dangers out there, that we've exaggerated the dangers, partly from the media, partly because experts tend to play them up, and so on and so forth. And we've lost our common sense about this. But the weight of school is driving a lot of this, the weight of school. School has over time become a bigger and bigger thing. It's taking more of children's time. When I was in school in the 1950s, we had 5 extra weeks of vacation compared to today. The school day was shorter. We had in elementary school 2 hours outdoors, a half-hour recess in the morning, half-hour in the afternoon, a full hour at lunch. Somehow we've developed the absurd notion that children are better off sitting in their seats, doing boring work, instead of playing and exploring, which they're designed to do, which is how they develop their brains and intellect. And what we're doing instead is drilling for tests that don't really have much to do with the realities of life. They're not really very important things to learn, but somehow we've made that the measure of education. We've gotten under this kick that somehow you can measure education with standardized tests. And so the goal of school is to increase those tests. And the belief is that you increase those test scores by drilling children, preventing them from play. That's the biggest problem. That's the driving problem. And then parents have bought into this. So we've come away with the idea that what I sometimes call the schoolish view of child development, that children develop best when they're carefully guided and directed by adults. Children develop by seizing the opportunities for independence, by learning to become adults, by solving their own problems, by getting lost and finding their way home, by getting into trouble and finding their way out of trouble, by being bullied and figuring out how to deal with the bully without some adult there solving all their problems for them. But we have developed this idea that it's our job as adults always to be around children, always to solve their problems for them, always to tell them what to do because we know better than they do. And the result is we're not giving them the opportunity to learn how to solve their own problems. So I think that's the big problem. And part of it is, until recently, there was no, and by recently, I mean the last few decades, there was no particular reason to really be talking about the value of play. Everybody just assumed this is what kids do. They play, they play. And, that's what kids do. It's like if you're a fish, you don't worry about water. Your water's there, right? But as soon as the water's missing, then you have fish writing dissertations about the importance of water. And
It got us
this
into
is
trouble, Peter.
this is the kind of so the other thing I want to say, so we're a bunch of adults talking about play. And so we're kind of talking about the role of adults, and we're talking about adult play and so on and so forth. That's natural, we're adults. There was a study done a number of years ago where kids, they wanted to know how kindergarten kids define play. So they showed kids various pictures and asked them, is this play or not play? The determining factor as to whether they decided it was play or not play was there an adult in the picture. If there was an adult in the picture, it was not play. They assumed that that adult was directing the activity, that that adult would be interfering, that that adult would be. To kids, play is what you do with other kids, without adults, or you do it yourself. And so the idea that we should play with kids, that's fine. We should play with kids. It's good for us. It's good for the kids if they're playing with other kids. It's not bad for the kids to play with us as long as we're really playing and not using it to be teaching them something, or not using it, you know, I actually once Googled, should we playing with children? And I found all these moms who said, I'm told I'm supposed to play with my child, and so I play with my child. Let me be honest, I hate playing with my child. I found moms saying this, and then when I read on why they were saying this, I realized it's because they had this notion that playing with your child means letting your child take control and letting your child dictate to you what you are supposed to do. And so they would say things like, you know, my child wants to play this game that involves twirling a hoop around and around. And I have to admit, it was fun for the first 100 times, and then it got pretty boring. Or my child wants to play a fantasy game, a make-believe game, and she tells me exactly what character I have to be and what words I have to say, and she doesn't allow me the freedom to do what I want to do. And so my response to those parents is, no self-respecting child would allow themselves to be bullied by your daughter in that way, you know? And so you're not helping your daughter by playing in that way. So it's hard for parents to play with adults because we're very different. Hard for adults to play with kids, because we're different from the kids. We don't have the same energy level. We don't have the same humor. We don't have the same tolerance for repetition. And also we tend to think that our job when we're playing is to somehow help our children instead of just to have fun. And if you're not just having fun, it's not play.
Yep. Yeah. And that is sometimes hard for us to just do, just to be there in the moment.
I think our primary role regarding play as adults is to be sure that our children have other children to play with. That's what children need. And we now live in a society where our children are deprived of that. They see other children in school, but they don't have the opportunity to play in school. And we're depriving them of other opportunities. And when they do see other children, it's in some kind of adult-directed sports or some kind of adult-directed things instead of just going out to play.
Mucking around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
go ahead,
Jana.
I mean, you touched on so many things that I want to add on to, and I know this is not a conversation about policy, educational policy, but I do want to follow up on your first point about what's happening in school right now and kindergartners being forced to learn how to read and all of that. And, you know, we all know it's got to be this whole shift in the system and perception, but what I see also now, I see Brooklyn as this common thread. I'm a parent of 2 little boys in Brooklyn. And what I see is that the schools that allow you to, not be forced into this system where children need to, focus on all these academics in kindergarten are schools that are not affordable to most families. So if you go to the public schools, my children go to a great public school. This isn't about, public versus private, but the reality is that, the testing, the standardized testing you're talking about, all that's happening right now. And, we can talk about all the schools that we're connected to in our own lives, personally and professionally. That to me is a huge barrier in any community that we're talking about. And that is what we're trying to do at Ubuntu, is provide a different type of learning to children in an environment where they don't have that type of, just the experience to play and you have that time. But I don't really have anything else to say about it, but to me, I just sit on that, and it's such a challenge because you're trying to shift perceptions, but if that's reinforced to parents over and over again in communities, then, what's important becomes what those metrics look like.
Maybe I can respond to that with something so I'm a member of one of the founding board members of an organization called Let Grow. Lenore Skenazy is the president of it. And we've been working with schools and whole communities to bring play into children's lives. And so there are a growing number of schools that have bought into this, mostly elementary schools. So just for example, there's a school district on Long Island, the Patchogue-Medford School District, where they have this, unfortunately for Patchogue-Medford, the superintendent has moved to a bigger district. He's become somewhat famous from what he's done in his district. But he decided that he came to the conclusion that what the schools that he was superintendent of were doing was harmful to children. And he made a lot of changes. He encouraged the dropout movement regarding standardized testing. Mm-hmm. He gave the teachers more autonomy in the classroom to respond to the children's needs more than, a little bit like old-fashioned teachers who could do what they wanted in the classroom.
Close the door.
He increased recess. And in addition to that, and this is what I want to mention, he introduced, and this was kind of actually my suggestion, introduced something that they call Play Club. So Play Club is 1 hour, they started off small, just 1 hour a week before school. I wanted it to be either during the school day or after school, but for bureaucratic reasons, they could only do it before school. So 1 hour a week before school, almost the entire school is open up for free play, really, truly free play, all ages combined. So it'll be in a typical elementary school, 150 to 200 kids, all playing together. In the gymnasium, the art room, the art supplies are available, the outside playground, the hallways, they're running in the hallways, they're tossing balls around, they're throwing balls down from balconies. It looks absolutely wild. You would never see this in another school. Now, the principals and the teachers initially were worried about this. They thought, oh my God, this is going to be chaos. Things are going to be broken. Kids are going to get hurt. They're going to bully one another. After a few weeks of this, everybody was behind it. The teachers even who resisted it, the parents who were worried about the people who were worried that I was worried the kids weren't going to get up an hour early to go to school, even for play. Oh, they all want to get up to play. They tell their mom, tomorrow's play club, be sure and get me to school. And one of the reasons that and also the thing, there are two reasons I think that it really works. One is, the teachers have been told not to intervene. They've been told, while you're observing this, you are not teachers. You are like lifeguards on a beach. You're there to save somebody's life, but you're not there to solve little quarrels. You're not there if somebody skins their knee. You're not there because somebody looks a little lost or they've got tears. This is for them to solve. This is for them to solve.
Anywhere, Peter?
What's that?
Is this written anywhere? Can we access this?
You can find the ABC NewsHour public television has done a documentary on it, which I think you can find online, and you can.
You have a name for us?
You can find
this.
So, or go to the website of Let Grow, and you can find information about it there too. So this is now going on to more and more schools. There are schools, there's a school nearby me, an elementary school, which has picked it up, and they also are raving about it. The teachers are developing a better attitude about the kids because the same kid who looks kind of dull in the classroom looks brilliant out there playing. Mm-hmm. People were afraid that the older kids would bully the younger kids. And I said, don't worry about that. All the data suggests the opposite. Kids don't bully younger kids in this kind of a context. They care for younger kids. They nurture younger kids. They'll help solve the problems of the younger kids. So age mixing, another awful thing we've done in our society is segregate children by age. Traditionally, most play is age mixed. And age mixed play is more nurturing, more caring, less competitive, less bullying than when children are playing in the same age, because everybody's different. And older kids naturally like little kids. They naturally want to help little kids, and little kids love older kids. So when they're playing together, whether they're roughhousing together, or when the older kids are giving them piggyback rides or whatever it is, or they're playing ball and the older kids are showing them how to throw the ball straight, everybody's having fun in that kind of play. So part of the secret, this to me is a way to make real play possible in our culture today, because where else can kids get together in such large groups and age mixed groups? In the past, you could just go out to the vacant lot and there'd be other kids of all ages and you play, but now you can't do that. So we need these kinds of situations for the other promising development is the development of adventure playgrounds. And that's another thing we're supporting. And growing, there's somewhat of a revival of development of adventure playgrounds. So these are playgrounds where they're also called junk playgrounds. There's, old tires, there's boards, there's hammers and nails, there's trees, there's stuff, and they're fenced off. And the reason for the fencing is to keep the adults out. So
I can see you dying to say something, Jesse. What do you think there?
I think that this adds an interesting question, because hearing Jana's question, in our work, what we'd say is you want to create the conditions for adults to see the capacity of children, to discover what children are capable of. It'll change their relationship with children, and that means seeing and hearing children in play. And so if that change comes in part from adults seeing children, then you have to think about that fence between the children and the adults if you want to change the systems. Because if you're not in an institutional setting, if you're not with adults that are making decisions about those children, seeing what children can do, then they're not going to fundamentally change their needs or vis-a-vis the children. And so for us, Ms. Chung's experience in China, certainly when she told Chinese parents that their children shouldn't be learning, that they should be playing, how she said it was, I listened to what those parents' needs were. They wanted their children to be safe, they wanted them to be clean, they wanted to be sanitary, and they wanted them to learn. And the parents' desire for the child to learn is a good, natural thing. Here's how they're learning. I'm going to show you, you're going to experience your child learning. It's not a message a lot of people get. We were working with a child in California with, on the spectrum, who was blind and 6 years old. And we spent an hour watching her engage with materials, behaviors that she had been told by, a trained professional were signs of distress. We saw her using those to mark when she had made a hypothesis and seen the outcome. And so in a week, she was riding on roller skates and she was blind because she had an environment where adults saw what she was capable of, rather than using their limiting assumptions to design courses of behavior that they expected that child to see, or that gave them the satisfaction of their anxieties being answered through the certainty of a prescription.
For us here, actually, at our school, we have had to be incredibly clear about what kids are learning as they play, because they would go home from school every day and the parents would say, what did you do today? And they would say, we played. And the parents would be, oh no, I'm not doing all I can for my child. And so we created something called the Daily Buzz. And at the end of the day, we create a document that parents can read so that they can understand all of the incredible things that are happening for their children in play, without us having to say to the children, now remember to go, when you go home today and you tell your parents about how you divided all of these, toys between yourselves and the other kids, remember to tell your family that you were doing division today. You were actually working on the algorithm. We don't have to say it to them, but we say it to the families. And I think this is one way that we can sort of change the hearts and minds of the parents, because I think that is the only way that we're going to move public schools and move other schools away from this idea that play is not beneficial for children in a way that's quantifiable.
I'm taking notes, by the way. My notes are really exciting.
I'm glad. I'll take a copy of those.
Yeah. And I just want to, I tend to do this when I'm listening and absorbing everything. And what I'm hearing a lot about is that we're in a position as people who really love play. We have a position here of advocacy. And so what I'm hearing is that what I hope that by the end of our time together, which is in 9 minutes, excuse me, just so you know, I'm very aware of the timing. I just was wondering if we could all collect some of our thoughts at the end of our time here together to discuss what we want to do long term, because each of us obviously has had great successes with our interpretation and our expression of play in the various organizations that we've been involved with, and including our lives as parents. But what I'd like to see, because I'm looking at all these notes that we've made, that I'd like to see how we can advocate, because this last piece was fascinating, that I come from an evidence-based world. My career as a physician all became about evidence-based, so that basically we ended up, economically dictating the terms of how we practiced medicine, because it was really important to make sure that whatever we did had a clear change in the behavior or the health of a human, and that it was economically a very, a credible model. And you can see where that's put us now in the pandemic. But evidence-based is what's happened actually with learning and education, that people have, generationally been forcing all of us to look at. So what works in school, and what are the results we're looking for? And so we've moved away from advocating for the constituent creativity that's so important in education. So I'm asking us to have a task here. I'd like Julie to lead this, okay?
There's a dichotomy that we make in our society between play on the one hand and learning on the other.
Right.
We've got to help parents understand, just as Julie does in her classroom, that play involves learning. A lot of the emphasis that's going on in the schools on drill and kill is generated by our government's attempt to engage in the standardized testing model and to propel all children forward. So, No Child Left Behind is the origin of a lot of this stuff. And that was done by Bush and Ted Kennedy. I mean, the intention there was lovely. The intention was,
all good.
Right? No Child Left Behind. Let's own it. There's been this huge achievement gap. But the irony is that all they created was what I call a learning illusion. The learning illusion is that if you memorize junk, you're going to be a capable person and a capable student. And the research, there is a ton of research, Jane, we need more, on what kinds of things play can promote. And that's why we make a distinction between free play, which is what we've pretty much been talking about the whole time, and guided play, where parents or teachers more likely set up the environment for children and follow children's lead in bringing out the things that children ask about, the things that children are interested in. So, for example, we did a study, Kelly Fisher was the first author, in which we showed that teaching children about geometric forms, you could do it didactically. You could say, a triangle has 3 corners and 3 sides. So one of the conditions was didactic. One of the conditions was free play, just giving them things that they could play with to discover these properties. And another was guided play, where the person working with the child followed the child's lead and got the child involved in a make-believe way to learn these properties. Let's learn the secrets of the shapes, right? And it was in that latter condition that children showed a 30% increase over children in didactic instruction for being able to recognize novel instances of geometric shapes. What does that mean? It means learning that takes place in a playful way, where children have agency, is generative and it's sticky. That's what you want, sticky learning. And just telling kids stuff and asking them to memorize things backfires.
Yeah. Yep.
It doesn't stick in the same way. And we have a lot of research now that shows this.
Yes. Yeah, I would just say, and then I see Peter has something, but I would just say at our school, the kids wanted to build a lean-to. They wanted to build a fort. And over time, after a lot of experimentation, the discovery was that the triangle is the strongest, is the strongest shape.
Nice.
And you could spend a lot of time telling kids that, but the fact that they discovered that in building something that they wanted to have was much deeper, much more meaningful to them. Yeah. Peter, go ahead. I saw you.
Yeah, so Jane asked about research evidence regarding free play, and so I just wanted to mention a couple of research projects that I'm involved in now. One of them is along with Lenore Skenazy, we're doing a huge poll right now, a huge survey of families at home now that the kids are home. In which both the parents and the kids are reporting on a regular basis over time on what's going on at home. And already we're getting, and in addition to that, we're also, we have this essay contest where kids are writing essays about what they're doing at home. And we're hearing from really many families about how the parents are seeing what their children are learning as because the children are free to do what the children want to do. And now that they see the children in front of them, they see, and we're getting messages all the time saying, oh, I hope they never start online learning here because my child is learning so much by being freed from these school requirements. My child has picked up the guitar and is learning the guitar. My child is reading books we're finding around the house and asking questions about it and doing his own online research about things that he or she has discovered. My younger child learned to ride a bicycle. Never learned to ride a bicycle, been out riding a bicycle. I also got, by the way, an email from a psychotherapist who worked with children who said, I'm seeing a lot less anxiety in my clients now than I was seeing before. And I'm hearing that from parents too. So so in fact, I don't want to say I agree that this is a terrible thing with this pandemic, and many families are suffering and many children are suffering.
Yes.
But I'm hearing from many families, and in this study, we're going to be hearing from hundreds of families. And it'll be interesting how it plays itself out. But we're hearing, I'm also observing it directly. I'm a bicyclist, until this pandemic, there would be no way to know that children even live in this town that I live in, unless you see them getting on the school bus in the morning and off in the afternoon. You never see children outdoors. Despite the conditions that you're kind of supposed to be careful outdoors, I'm seeing children outdoors for the first time. I'm seeing kids riding bicycles. I'm seeing kids playing in their own front yard. I'm seeing whole families play games like badminton. When was the last time anybody saw a family playing badminton out in their front lawn? This is really an eye-opening experience for a lot of kids. So we're documenting that in best we can. The other study I'm doing, although it has yet to be fully approved because it has to go through the state legislature system in New Hampshire, but the Chancellor of Education in New Hampshire is interested in research and has asked me to design it. He's concerned about the high levels of anxiety of children in New Hampshire schools, just as high levels of anxiety everywhere. And he knows about the Let Grow projects and so on. And we're doing what I've proposed is a set of formal studies, really in an experimental-like way, where some of the schools will get the play club and some of the other things we're doing through Let Grow and others not. And then we'll follow up. We'll follow up with all kinds of ways of assessing how anxious are the children, how much do the children like school, how are they doing in school, how have some kind of an assessment of internal locus of control. I mean, one of the big problems as a result of play deprivation is that children are growing up feeling no sense of control over their own lives, and that predisposes them for anxiety and depression. And it's one of the reasons college students are having such problems. Suddenly they're in college and they don't know how to deal with the independence because we haven't allowed them the independence. So we'll be looking at various kinds of measures of those things in those kids who have these play opportunities built into their school day versus children who are doing the same things that they're doing already in schools.
Great. So, you know, it is actually 12 o'clock, but if you're all available and willing to stay for a few more minutes, I would like to hear from all of the panelists a little bit just about this idea of how we can document and help families and all the stakeholders to sort of understand this critical benefit of play and why it's not extra, why it's so important for us.
So I, with other people, created something called the Learning Sciences Exchange. And what that's about, funded by the Jacobs Foundation, is breaking down the silos between researchers like myself, between journalists, between people in the world of entertainment and people in the world of educational policy. The idea is to help all of us understand ways to help the public understand that it's not play and learning, but that they're one and the same thing. And if we could think about additional ways to influence parents' thinking and understanding, I've always wanted to make PSAs, public service announcements. They have to be fun. They can't be teachy preachy, to show, like you have a little voice come down and say, oh, he just learned so-and-so, and look at that, he learned this, because I really want parents to understand how playful learning fuels children's lives. And another thing that we have, and it's currently in the world, playful learning landscapes. It's available online to have a look at. Playful learning landscapes are installations that are being requested from us for all over the world, including in South Africa. We have a supermarket that has signage that encourages parents and children to talk playfully. And we have things of this nature that invite parents and children to play and talk, because, speaking to Jane, there is gobs of research showing that when parents interact with their children around their children's interests, children learn. So we have targeted these to low-income communities where parents may, we're not sure, play less with their children. And what we're trying to encourage, these are things that are actually outside in the real world. We have installations in Philadelphia, for example, and there will be something in Seattle and other places. And it's all about getting families out there talking with their children and playing. It's not prescriptive in the least. It's what families make of these things. And we point out very minimal signage, because you don't need signage to know what to do. That these are the kinds of things, for example, a hopscotch that has no rules, but we encourage jump as it says and then jump another way, builds executive function or children's ability to self-regulate. It's really important for parents to understand that childish games are important for children's development and learning. You know, red light, green light, you play this stuff, Jane, when you were a kid? Mother, may I? You had to control yourself. Simon Says, there are scientific papers on Simon Says. Children have to control themselves if they're going to win in these games, and they're motivated to engage in the self-control that they need to become more adult-like in their demeanor and behavior.
Interesting, Roberta, interesting. I'm wondering now from Jesse and Jana, if I could just hear a little bit about how these threads kind of move across borders. Well, and what you've seen in other places around play.
Well, I would say I just want to kind of come in on this question of research and evidence basis. You know, my wife's a pediatric neurologist. I believe in science, and but I also know that research can be marshaled in any direction. Questions can be asked in different ways. The outcomes are defined in the design. Questioning and testing hypotheses, there's truth in that, but you can marshal evidence in a lot of different directions. I think that what we communicate to people around the world is the best research evidence is the child in front of you. And for a lot of teachers, a lot of children, and a lot of parents, we really have to ask them to stop listening and reading a lot of people from outside their own experience, explaining to them what children can do, what they should do, how they should be. And that sounds a little contradictory, because I'm now saying this is what you should do. Don't listen to other people. What I'm really saying is you should listen and see the children in front of you. And that is something that is important, I think, in our work, regardless of where you are. But it affects national policy and local policy, how you justify outcomes, how you measure. The danger is those measurements justifying decision-making, that systems of capital, of power, the needs of the marketplace, whether it's 21st century skills, which are defined by an economic forum representing business interests, predicting their needs in 20 years, they sound nice. Let's go argue for complex problem solving, but don't design systems based on what those systems need in their extractive way from children and families. Go back to the child. Discover the child if you can. I think for right now, we're working with our programs. We want schools to be listening to the needs of families. Where's the family? Where are they? What are their rights to food, shelter? If there is trauma, if there are unsafe circumstances, deal with that. But then when you can deal with those basic needs, listen, create opportunities for children to have unmediated contact with each other. We have technology that allows that. You can have 10 children on a Zoom call. And as a teacher, you can create spaces where you're listening to what a child's experience is. One of the recent examples, I guess for me, from being in Anji in a classroom with 5s and 6s, we were watching a teacher doing what's called play sharing. She had been out in the morning for an hour and a half, taking videos of children in her class, engaged with water and with other materials that were in the environment. And we were in the back, we were videotaping her because she's been there for 3 or 4 years. She's a beginning teacher in her growth. And she was really interested in the fact that the kids were talking about an incline in the plane that water was going down. And you could see that her mind was going towards, I'm interested in that. She wasn't saying anything because in Anji, teachers don't guide children's insights. But you could see her thinking was focusing on that. What we heard the children talking about was the relationship between pouring water on an object in the pipe in contact with sand, the effect of changing the pressure of the water and the incline, and the relationship between the sand, the object, and its movement. Far more complex than an inclined plane. And if the teacher thinks that the inclined plane is important, then they're missing the complex physics that those children are defining for themselves. So for us, it doesn't matter where you're on the world, see children, listen to children, be present, be patient. If you create an environment where your focus is what you're doing is important, I want to hear it, then you can be present for their play and not make it about your emotional needs or the needs of systems that you don't control that want to extract something from you.
Beautiful. Jana, can you talk a little bit about your experience? And
Yeah, so we're in South Africa where we are. I mentioned we're in the townships, and our parents are not reading the literature, all of the evidence coming out. They're not reading any of that. They are not aware of it. They see what they know, and that's what they have access to. Julie, you and I have talked about the daily buzz and how in the environment that I'm in, the children come home from school and they say they played, and their caregivers, most of them are not biological parents, so we call them caregivers. Their caregivers and families say, okay, but what have you been doing? And they have low literacy, so they're not, we don't have a daily buzz we can send home. So the only way that we can really shift that thinking is, Jesse, following up on your point, is the child in front of them and making sure that they are watching that transformation and allowing that child to be and experience what they are in our school. And that is a safe space. That's in our community, even right now with everything going on, and there's a lockdown in South Africa, there's been a ton of crime in the community where we work in. And Ubuntu, where we are, the community center and our campus has been the safe space for people to come. And right now, our children and women and families are even more vulnerable than they were before. They can't do Zoom calls with 10 kids on them. They can't do anything like that. Right. We're lucky enough that we're topping up data for our teachers to call them, and some of them can't answer their phones because they don't have phones or they don't have enough data to even pick up the phone. So we're dealing with really challenging issues, and right now our goal is to make sure we're just checking in with caregivers and families and that children are okay. And I guess I'm sorry, I've now gone off on a tangent, but it's context matters, right?
Oh, yes.
Context matters, and that's what's important. And play, to me, the common thread is the reality is regardless of resources, culture, where you are, it is universal. Like Roberta, you started off this conversation.
Yes.
It doesn't matter where you are, children are going to play. And we're finding out how children are playing in the environments that they're in. Roberta, you mentioned in the home, they're in their homes, or they walk outside and they're playing as they can with their neighbors, but not getting close to them in terms of what they can do. And you can see just from the stories that are coming from our teachers. And that is what I am inspired by right now every day, is just talking to our teachers that are all from our community there in South Africa and the stories that they're getting. But that children are stuck at home. And so it's what they do and how they're experiencing the situation that they're in, and how then their parents caregivers are allowing them to interact with the situations that they're in, allowing them to play, like we've kind of gone back to, is keep the adults out. And just, it's so layered, because then I think of this other hat that I wear as a mom of 2 kids in a public school in Brooklyn. And when we talk about policy and everything that we need to do to, shift the conversation or shift the policy, it's complicated, because the same highly educated people I know with their master's degrees and their PhDs can sit and talk about play and the importance of play. And I let my children do this and all of that. But then when it comes to, standardized testing for our 3rd graders, or the report cards coming out, they completely pivot. And they're not the same person that I was, talking to over a coffee before school or after school. That it completely shifts. So I think it's really complicated when I think of the situation in South Africa, the situation in Brooklyn, and then how I'm mentioning 2 places that, represent a very small population.
So I'm going to have to go pretty soon, but this is such a hot group. I am so enjoying this conversation. I just want to say we can bring back joyful learning. There is no reason to engage in this kind of drill and kill stuff in the schools that is not good for children. And it doesn't even promote the best kind of learning. So I think that under the influence of the testing movement, which has not been reduced even with the Common Core curriculum, we're still marching in this direction where we're looking for kids to do better on standardized tests. And the irony is they're not. The achievement gap has been stable for about 35 years, and children are not improving in states. In general, we don't need to just keep fixing at the edges. We need a radical rethink of the way that schools should be run. And it is much more like when we were kids than now, because there was not this emphasis on pushing kids to read in kindergarten when they're not ready, taking away all the manipulatives in kindergarten that they need to understand number. That's the irony. We're doing things that shortcut children's real learning.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I think there's so much more to be said here, and maybe this is a panel that could reconvene at some point.
Yes, please.
Yes. So I just want to say I'm so incredibly grateful to everyone, to all of our panelists. I am continually amazed by your insights and your thoughtfulness about this subject and so many subjects that I think we touched in this conversation. I learned so much today, and I appreciate that. And selfishly, that is what I'm after.
That's how I feel.
So I want to thank you again, and I just want to say when we close our meetings at Slate School, we always say positive rice. and we send it out to the world. So I'd like to say positive rice to all of you, to our panelists, and to 6 continents while I have a chance. I don't know if I'll have a chance to do that again. So thank you to all of you, and we look forward to seeing you all at Slate School again, and I hope that we can reconvene this group at a somewhat later date, so we can talk about some more of this important work that you're all doing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Yes, happy-
Now I have to figure out how to turn it off.
This is great.
Nice to
Thank
meet you
you.
all. Bye
Yes,
bye.
same
Nice to meet you
here.
all.
Pleasure.
Great pleasure.
Be well, everybody.
Be well. Take
Be
care.
well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.